Now I want to bring in our guest today, Republican strategist and former George H.W. Bush White House aide Joe Watkins, Betsy Woodruff, politics reporter for the Daily Beast, and Taryn Rosenkranz, founder and CEO of New Blue Interactive. Betsy, let's start with you. You heard what Hallie was telling us here about this rigged polling system where folks will be going to vote, and also he's also looking at the polls that we're watching as those numbers actually separate and get greater in gap, as our NBC News poll shows today. But his surrogates are not echoing the same thing. They don't seem to be able to get left hand with right hand together here, Betsy.
Right. It's certainly a funny conundrum, and I think it points to the really conspiratorial leanings of folks in the very close inner circle around Trump in this campaign. His campaign CEO, Steve Bannon, who formerly was the head of Breitbart News, has long pushed conspiratorial understandings of how power works. He's been prone to believing ideas about globalization, that there's potentially a connection between how banks operate and how billionaire hedge fund managers operate, and that they collude with leaders of the Republican Party to try to undermine the United States. Like, these are arguments that folks who are very close to Donald Trump themselves have made. When they talk about the system being rigged, of course, it's very different than when Trump surrogates say, oh, we're just complaining about media bias. The problem, of course, is that those conspiracy theories are outlandish, and it's very difficult to win undecided voters if your message is something that's this dark and weird and, to be honest, disconnected from reality.
Disconnected from reality potentially here, Joe, because those who are critical of the Trump campaign are saying, he's diverting here instead of what is now really the headline. Those are those 9 accusers, right? What do you think about the strategy so far? This is where they may be on the same page here, Donald Trump as well as the surrogates, going after the accusers themselves.
Well, I think that's a terrible strategy to go after the accusers. I mean, all it does is it just reinforces whatever negative narrative about him is already out there. Usually when people are accused of having done things over the years, especially if they might be guilty of them, they apologize. And they just say, I may have done something indiscreet. I apologize for it. Please forgive me. But to actually go after the people that are accusing you and to call them liars and to give life to it by spending time tweeting people at 3 in the morning and at all hours of the day and night, especially when you've only got 20-some-odd days left in your campaign, that to me seems to be a losing strategy. And it's not serving him well. It doesn't serve the country well either.
It's not serving him well. Taryn, as we watch our poll numbers, we were just mentioning those, the new NBC News poll out today showing that 11-point lead right now, up 20 points with women, as has been mentioned. What does he have to do at this moment to turn it around? I don't know what the internals are showing them at the moment, but certainly our polls are saying that strategy is not working.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the scorched earth policy is what he's been going with here. It's like his final meltdown. I mean, I think at this point, I'm going to borrow a line from Michelle Obama's speech this week where she said, at this point, we all know who Donald Trump is. Now we have to know who we are. And I think that's what the Republican Party is going to have to struggle with, is to see who stands by him in these final 23 days and, how much impact this is going to have on some of the down ballot races. Because at this point, it's those who are standing with him and he's just sort of setting the whole thing up in flames is going to be really difficult to stay with him, especially if you're a U.S. Senate race, particularly even in these congressional districts in the suburbs. And, and a lot of these moral voters are really feeling that they cannot simply vote for him. And the more he reacts, by bashing the accusers and some of the just disgraceful language and things he's, saying in response, it's just giving more fuel to that.
Traditionally, the fuel that they watch on both sides is fundraising, right, Betsy? And the fundraising numbers coming out this weekend, it does not look good for the Trump campaign. It looks great for the Clinton campaign. Third quarter Clinton numbers here show that she outraised Trump $261 million to $61 million. What's your sense here? She is moving along. Her campaign infrastructure here is like a juggernaut. All the Trump controversies also perhaps helping that money advantage. And the race in many of the swing states shouldn't be as close as they are, considering all of this, at least looking at the money, right, and looking at the headlines. But we're not seeing that getting to these poll numbers here.
Without a doubt. And it's interesting how much of a gap there is between the nationwide polling numbers that pretty much consistently show Hillary Clinton, with the exception of a few polls, with a commanding and a comfortable lead. There's a gap between those polls and polls in a number of swing states, particularly Ohio, where almost depending on what day of the week it is, you have a poll showing Trump leading or a poll showing Hillary leading. Of course, Florida is also a lot more competitive than a lot of Democrats would have wanted it to be. And the reality is that Hillary Clinton has been outraising Donald Trump for this entire campaign. One of the arguments that Republicans have been making going back for years, something that you hear as an essential Republican talking point, was that Hillary Clinton was a really flawed candidate. Republicans at the RNC banged the drum over this for years and years. But now, especially when we look at the fundraising difference, at how well Hillary Clinton is doing with massive amounts of funds
$200
versus
million
Trump.
there.
Yeah, you know, it really highlights money can only take you so far.
Well, you know, Joe, you've seen a couple cycles. I'm not mentioning anything about your age here. Not at all here, Joe. But as we look at this, the new thing this cycle is, right, that money hasn't fully been the barometer to watch when we're talking about Donald Trump because of the way that he's been able to message one-to-one. So maybe as we look at the trending here on money, there is still, as we've been saying, 23 days left here, and he can turn this around.
Well, it's going to be very, very hard. I mean, it's really hard to overcome this kind of a money disadvantage. I mean, Hillary Clinton is outraising him at a phenomenal pace. And I don't know that he's ever going to catch up with that. But in addition to money, message matters. And for a candidate like Donald Trump, in order to be competitive, you've got to widen your base. I mean, he's got a core of voters who are going to support him no matter what. But that core of voters that's going to support him aren't big enough. He doesn't have a wide enough group of folks to win a November election against Hillary Clinton. And so he needs money, of course, but he needs money and message. And I don't think and he's not staying in message by attacking the people who are accusing him. So he's got a tough way to go.
Taryn, you know, one way in that tough way to go here is to get the help on the state level, right? You got to have governors to help you in those swing states on the ground. But a good example of this, and we'll finish with this right here, is what's happening in Ohio, right, with John Kasich. They are not seeing eye to eye. The major dissension in that state, the state chairman saying this week he didn't know who he was going to vote for on top of the John Kasich issue. Are we seeing a preview really here of what's going to be played out as we make it to the finish line? He is not going to embrace what is so important as he gets to the finish line, and every vote counts in these swing states.
Absolutely, and I think that he kind of proved that this week. Instead of trying to kind of pull these Republicans in these battleground states, he just continued to go after them with his words against Paul Ryan, and everything he's been doing is not trying to help and get these folks to be there with him. And I think to that, it's going to be really hard to overcome that when the top of the state Republican Party in these battleground states isn't standing with you. And I think that that's going to be difficult. And at this point, all you're seeing are these down ballot Republicans trying to save themselves and make sure they're preventing a Democratic wave election. Okay,
our wise counsel will stick around there. Betsy, Taryn, Joe, some older than others, will be back a little bit later this hour. Joe, we love you. Okay, thank you all three. We'll see you a little bit later in the show. All right. Well, the third and final debate, a little more than 72 hours away. Back with us, Republican strategist and former George H.W. Bush White House aide Joe Watkins, Betsy Woodruff, politics reporter for the Daily Beast, and Taryn Rosenkranz, founder and CEO of New Blue Interactive. Taryn, I want to start with this. You know, we saw things get nasty last weekend, and now David Axelrod, you may have seen this, the longtime former advisor to President Obama, he put out a tweet, and he asks if Hillary Clinton should skip this final debate, perhaps because the poll numbers are looking so good, as we've been reporting in our own polling here, given Donald Trump's latest call for drug testing ahead of time, for instance, another reason. Others have said Trump was out of line last weekend as well. Any benefit, you think, here strategically for Clinton to go, hey, let's sit this one out?
I don't think so, because I think one of the things that she's going to run into is that they need to keep running this campaign as if she's running a couple points behind, no matter what the polls show, because we've all talked about this. You know, it's just very hard this election to not anticipate another surprise, another something he's up to. I mean, who knows what's happening? And she doesn't want to say that she's not giving him the time, especially as he's making these accusations about being rigged, that she's not, you know, giving voters the chance to get to know her and her issues and her positions, and also another chance to show the American people that she knows her stuff. I mean, I think that's what comes out of each of these debates, is that they can feel good that she knows what she's doing, she knows what she's talking about, she's qualified, extremely qualified to be our commander-in-chief.
Betsy, I want to move to you on this. Also, of course, looking at the debate, but also looking back to look forward. It quickly turned to the fallout from Donald Trump's hot mic comments about women. Now we have 9 women coming forward with accusations. How fast do you think we're going to get to this topic? And do you think it'll be along the same, if you will, tone that we saw from both of the candidates?
You know, it's a good question because Chris Wallace, as a moderator, is likely to focus really specifically on the issues that he's already laid out that he wants the candidates to talk about. I don't know that I can predict whether he'll bring up the question of these new allegations in the first few minutes of the debate or not. That said, of course, it's going to be hovering over the entire event. And if Wallace doesn't bring it up, I think there's a pretty high likelihood that Hillary Clinton will mention these allegations regarding Trump. Of course, they have been the story of the week. They're going to continue having substantial coverage for the next few days, and it's going to be fascinating to see how Trump talks about them when he's actually having to go back and forth in a question and answer format rather than just sort of riffing at his rallies. So it's certainly going to come up. Hard to predict, of course, how he'll handle it, but definitely something that should be fun, for lack of a better word, to keep an eye on.
And those headlines certainly in the quiver for Hillary Clinton, in the quiver there for Donald Trump. Are the WikiLeaks releases of the emails here, Joe? And Hillary Clinton may have one last chance really to talk to America, right, about herself and the private email server controversy to try to get ahead of what might be released a little bit farther forward. And you might remember what she said back in August, that she short-circuited when it came to being truthful. And in fact, when we look at our new poll here, Joe, what it shows is that Trump leads slightly when it comes to being honest and straightforward. What do you think she says this time around, if anything different than she already has, about this email issue?
Well, I think she's doing very, very well. I mean, every poll I've seen and everything I've seen having to do with the current projected count in the Electoral College leads me to believe that Hillary Clinton has a very comfortable lead. So if I were her, I would just stick to what's been working already for her, which is just answering the questions in a thoughtful way and being as transparent as she can be about what has happened, and also, when need be, apologetic. But I think the real burden is on Donald Trump. I mean, if you're in a fight and you're behind, the burden is on you to really score a decisive win. And he's got to do a lot better than he did in the last debate. He just can't be aggressive and attacking. He's got to be really thoughtful about how he answers questions if he wants to broaden his base of support. If, for instance, every time you ask him a question about African Americans, he starts talking about the inner city and crime. And he didn't like the way that Alec Baldwin caricaturized him, but black people like me don't like being stereotyped either. I mean, we think about more, not all of us live in the inner city, and not all of us are plagued by crime.
Right.
And it's a real affront to many of us when that happens.
Yes. I want for all three of you very quickly here to give me your one-line headline. What do you think it's going to be on Thursday? That, you know, when we're done with this debate here, and I'm going to start with you, Betsy. What do you think that headline's going to be?
You know, I would guess Trump unshackled. He's suggested that he has been constrained by his campaign thus far, and now he finally feels like he can say whatever he feels like saying.
Unshackled.
I think at the debate, I think that's what we're going to hear. Yeah.
Taryn?
I think sniff, sniff. I just think that's what came out on the social networks on both debates was this unusual amount of sniffing. So let's see if it happens again. Third time's the charm.
Joe, what do you say?
Bare knuckle brawl, but it doesn't move the needle.
Okay, all great headlines. And of course, we'll all be waiting to see what happens. Thank you all three, Joe, Betsy, Taryn. You all have a very good Sunday.
You too.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
You bet.